Hi, everyone, and welcome to another round of Primary Sources. My name is Mindy Johnson, and on behalf of CTN, I am so grateful you are all here. We have a very, very exciting guest today, and I'm looking forward to an incredible conversation. So without further ado, let's get underway. As artists, in all the different realms that we work within, it's important sometimes to think back to those earliest steps that we took as creative, towards a creative expression as artists. Kind of whether it's learning that first piece of music or the joy of color and creating forms on a canvas or getting our fingers in the mix of what we do. There's something really, just that first experience, something about that first experience of the magic and transformative wonder of a shared experience in a theater, whether it is a film or live theater, whatever that is, there's something really magic about it. And that's the beauty, the basis of art, the production or expression of what is beautiful, appealing, or more than an ordinary experience. And it's an important part of who we are. We even surround ourselves in our environments. If we can, we should immerse ourselves with art. It can be transformative to our environments, to the worlds around us, from taking a bleak urban wall or setting, turning it into a powerful visual statement or experience, or even collectively unifying communities. Art has power. And as artists, the one who produces works primarily subject to aesthetic criteria. But beyond that, our role as artists is vital. When we look at some of our greatest artists, unique masters of their artistry, perhaps the largest impact of the arts is conveyed in these images of masters in their artistic disciplines. The great Billie Holiday with her bitter experiences expressed soulfully through song, or the powerful transformative portrayals that a brilliant actress such as Helen Mirren might portray on stage, or the altitude defying dance of the great Rudolf Nureyev. Every one of these masters of their art form is applying the aspect of emotion, an effective state of consciousness where the range of possible states of consciousness is experienced. And as artists, we work frequently within our work, and it's to achieve this level of emotion. Our work is born out of emotion to elicit that not only through our experience but through our observer or listener's experience. And when we experience and apply emotion to our work, a new level of experience melds and blends and turns and twists the experience of art into something new and even transformative. As storytellers, as songtellers, as artists, visual artists, we transport our audiences, our listeners, our observers to new levels of emotional experiences as well. And today's guest on Primary Sources has explored this concept relationship between art and emotion all throughout his legendary career, working with some of our top levels of industry, and through his long span of career. It is a great joy today to welcome, from animated characters to reality blending environments, the masterful artist and renowned Disney Imagineer, Joe Lanzisero. Joe, it is so wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you. It is, hold on, it's asked me to start my video, which I did. There I am. Thank you, Mindy. It is really a joy and an honor and a pleasure to be here. It's very special. I know that, the audience for this, a lot of them are animation focused and film focused, and I always like to consider my audience, think about who I'm going to be talking to today. But I think this subject matter that we've chosen to explore together transcends the film. And I mean, the examples that you put up on the screen I thought were fantastic, because I always think that all art is one.
Talk about
and the thread through all those fantastic artists that you showed is hopefully one of the subjects we'll get into today is this idea of emotion, you know, because all through my career, you know, it's always, I know that whether it's a film or a theme park ride or a show in a theme park, or even talking about, you know, creating some kind of experience with a product, it's always about thinking about a higher, you know, a higher emotional connection. You know, people want to be moved in some way, and especially when they're being entertained.
Yeah, so when you're approaching, you talk about this mantra, your overall approach of art is art, all art is one. Is that applying to the universal experience of art? Is that applying to the creative thought process of art
Uh,
or the end result of art?
Maybe a little bit of all of that,
Okay.
but I think I think it's the process for me. I think because all great artists, you know, are communicating on some, but they're just using different tools. Hopefully they have some big idea in their mind that they want to communicate, and hopefully that big idea is going to have some emotional content. And whether it's a dancer or a singer, a graphic artist, an animator, you know, I think that in the end, you know, that's the thread that connects them all together.
So when you're approaching, it, it could be designing a theme park, it could be creating an environment or experience for a client, it could be sitting down and just putting pen to paper. Is emotion forefront in your mind in what you do? You talk about the idea.
Yes. I think, you know what, if I think a little bit about my process, I think the first thing is story.
Okay.
You know, and of course all good stories have some emotional content to it. And I think about story in a couple of different ways when I approach my projects. First, let me back up a little bit and say I was very, very fortunate to have been trained at Cal Arts. I was a member of the first animation class there. Some of my fellow students went on to do amazing things, like John Lasseter went on to change the animation world. You know, Brad Bird was in my class. John Musker, who's part of the animation renaissance. I think back and I'm so fortunate because I feel like I learned as much from them as I did from the professors. We were just a bunch of kids who loved Disney. We loved to draw. I mean, I am passionate about drawing still today. And story. You know, I think, you know, we all love the idea of story and Disney storytelling. We were fortunate enough, you know, to have professors, teachers there that were the guys that worked directly with Walt. You know, well, our mentor at the studio was Eric Larson, the kindest, most gentlest, most patient and brilliant man. You know, I was fortunate enough to I purposely sought out Mark Davis, especially when I got into the theme park world, to understand a little bit more about how he approached what he did there.
And talk a little bit about what they infused within you in terms of how you apply that towards your work. I know Mark was very keen about a comprehensive experience and
Mm-hmm.
applying humor when needed, but he
Yeah.
also had uh, a great sense of the overall experience. Talk a little bit about some examples.
I I think what Mark brought, and with all those animators brought, getting back to this emotion thing, was being able to tap into the human experience. You know, and I mean, that's what animation's about. You know, these guys were brilliant. They were actors, you know, and a great actor, you know, becomes that character and understands that character and understands the nuances and understand how that character works in the larger context of, you know, the play or the movie. So that was first. Second, they were brilliant draftsmen and artists, and I loved that you know, each of those, Walt's Nine Old Men and all those artists, even going back before the Nine Old Men, people like Freddie Moore and Bill Tytla, they all brought something unique and different to the development of the art.
Mhm.
They weren't imitating something that had been done before. They were creating
Innovative. Yeah.
that industry. And they were innovating it, and they used all those great experiences and all that their different artistic backgrounds as well. Some were designers, some were fine artists, you know, they came from a variety of places with a variety of interests, and they brought all that to the evolution of this art form. And I think, you know, I love what technology has done to the world. You know, I think technology is a good thing, and I love the fact that it adds a sense of believability. Of, you know, you believe things more because they're more fully rendered and whatever. But at the core of it, you know, if you strip the technology away, it still has to have an emotional core. It still has to present itself and, you know, touch you in some way. So getting back to Mark, you know, you know, and why I think Walt tapped him to go and work in the theme parks. You know, Walt was creating these amazing worlds in the theme parks. You know, worlds that brought people to other places. In fact, that was his big innovation. There were amusement parks, you know, that had rides and roller coasters and all those things, but Walt really created this place that took you to another place. You know, you were in, you know, small town America. You went to the world of tomorrow. You know, you were in the frontier, and he infused it all with optimism too. You know, this was post World War II. We had just come out of this very dark time. I think Walt was an amazing, he was an optimist. In fact, I was fortunate enough to, like I said, get to work with a lot of the artists that work with him, but one gentleman in particular, John Hench. And John worked at Imagineering and well into his 90s. And John was a brilliant man. He was a philosopher, yeah, and he was able to look at and articulate the whole process of Imagineering, you know, creating these worlds and put them into words. You know, I think a lot of artists, myself included, we're very emotional and intuitive, and we can put it on paper and create it beautiful on paper, but it's another thing to be able to articulate it and, you know, put words into it. So yeah, John was brilliant at being able to articulate, you know, what we were doing in the park. So John, let me get back, you know, John and Mark. So Walt tapped Mark to come and work on the parks because, you know, they had created these amazing worlds, but I think Walt knew the one thing that was missing was that storytelling animation thing, you know, that people got in his films, and that was mostly through characters, and it was tricky because and I know for myself, you know, the kind of thinking process that I had to go through when I moved from animation to theme parks and trying to remember all those things that I learned in animation about story and staging and color and, you know, where to put things and such. But then translating it to this three-dimensional world. And so, of course, I went back and I looked at what Mark had done, because, you know, we kind of had a similar journey. I hate to compare myself to him because I actually, I should have a shrine in the corner of my office here to him, because he was so brilliant and prolific. That amazing 2-book set that Pete Docter and Chris Merritt did, I've worn it out. But it's mostly a testament to how prolific he was.
And it still just scratches the surface on the brilliance of Mark Davis. That's I'm so grateful that they did that. But let's talk a little bit about sort of the magic of what you do in terms of Imagineering. Now, you talked about how Walt had this sense of the transformative impact of space and the importance of that. Talk a little bit about how how you work to achieve that, how you extend it just beyond by, is it, through the use of color and familiar form. When I'm talking with my students in film, I always point out that we can learn, we can recite, and we can retain information, but when we apply emotion to that information, it lasts, it becomes a part
Mm,
of us, and that's the
yeah.
impact of cinema. How do we apply that to space and environment?
Um,
Is it color? Is it
it's
form?
it's a whole variety of things. You know what, Matt, why don't you bring up the Toontown image, the one that's Toontown, all one word. So I'm going to use that
Visual
as an example.
aids.
So I was, yeah, I was very fortunate. When I made the transition from animation into theme parks, I was only at Imagineering for a short while, and they immediately saw that I had this, you know, a little bit of what was, that what Mark had brought him was, and actually the Imagineers who brought me, and one gentleman in particular, Tony Baxter, I have to
Yeah.
tip of the hat to Tony, because Tony was instrumental in bringing me over to Imagineering, because he felt that they had lost a little bit of this. So getting back to your question, Mindy, about, in film, it's about a journey. It's a journey, it's a story journey, it's a character journey, and it's a place journey. You establish who the characters are. You start at the beginning, you create some kind of conflict, and you move people through this journey. So in the theme parks, we have two kinds of storytelling. We have this narrative storytelling, where in a ride, for example, like in Star Wars rides, and those where they're based on some known IP, you take people on a journey from taking all those elements that they've seen in the films, making sure you distill it down so they have all these emotional trigger points. But when you're creating a space, I always thought about, what's the visual journey that I'm taking them through, and using same way that IP has triggers. They've seen the movie, they know the characters, they know the music, they've heard that music. So when you create that ride experience and you bring those characters and music moments back, it brings them back and creates some emotional connection to the experience. So when creating a space, I have to think about what are those other triggers, those other things that are going to have that same effect, going to take people and connect them to the space. So with Toontown, we were tasked with the assignment of creating the world where Mickey and his friends lived. Surprisingly, that had never been done before. Everyone, when they asked people, well, where does Mickey Mouse live at Disneyland? It was, oh, he lives in the castle, because the castle was the iconic element that represented the park, but there was really no place where he lived. So at the time, I was young, and I was in some ways, being naive, not knowing what you don't know sometimes is a good thing.
This is true in certain instances.
Yeah. And so we just dived into this assignment of creating the place where these characters live. So the first thing we did was started watching all those short cartoons, which I had grown up with them, and I had watched a lot of them, but I was always, watching because I was interested in character animation and the performance of the characters and knowing the different animators who had worked on them. But, quickly realized that, the character and the character development was bigger than the places where they lived, at least in those animated shorts. So there really was no Mickey's house. There was no, a Goofy's house. And we were charged with the assignment of creating the little neighborhood where they all lived. So we thought about who they were. We spent a lot of time just talking about, who Mickey was, who Goofy is, who Donald is, understanding their personality. And just the same way, your wife, your husband, your your best friend, you know, people that you're close to. And once you get to them, you know, oh, well, they like to wear black vests, and they like, you know, they like to eat this food, and they like to play tennis, or all the things they like to do. So once we had that understanding of the characters, our job was then, how do we take those attributes and those things that we know about the characters and apply them to a real space and create something that, like, if you didn't know who Goofy was and you walked up to the house where Goofy lived, it should immediately start talking to you about, you know, his character and his personality. So there were physical, pardon me?
An extension of the character?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what we were trying to do. I mean, so I put the example of Goofy's house here because that's an easy one, because Goofy is Goofy. And, you know, and the other thing we did, we knew that these little houses and things we were doing, we're going to have to be exaggerated more than they would be in a regular cartoon. And that was also a product of the fact that the Roger Rabbit film had just come out. And in fact, the executives at the time, initially what we were designing was just going to be the little houses where the characters live, and you were going to get to see the characters and have a couple of little small rides and such. But then the then CEO of the company, Michael Eisner, he saw Roger Rabbit as his Mickey Mouse and wanted to make a Roger Rabbit statement. So that meant we had to expand our scope of what we were doing, and we were going to create this neighborhood portioned for him. And this is where the color thing comes in, because and getting back to this idea of triggers, visual, in this case, visual triggers that connect you to an emotion. So we knew we were going to do a little neighborhood where the characters live. And when you think about a neighborhood and you think about suburbia, it's usually lawns and white picket fences. You know, it's very cliche. I always think I always think back on I forget, we were in a meeting with George Lucas when they were first starting to work on a lot of the Star Wars attractions. This was way back in the 80s. And George Lucas said, you know, a cliche is a cliche because it works. You know, often people, you know,
kind of a shortcut to.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's a shortcut to, you know, and that's a lot of what that's a really good point, Wendy. It's a lot of, Mindy, it's a lot of this is about, you know, finding that trigger point, that shortcut that takes people to that story moment, that emotional moment that you want. And so getting back to this color idea, we knew we were going to have this little downtown, the little neighborhood area. And now with this assignment to create this kind of Toontown downtown, which was, you know, in the Toontown movie, in fact, it's the neighborhood, you know, it's a little edgy. So, you know, we wanted it more urban, a little industrial. And so when you think about, you know, those kinds of buildings, they're usually brick and stone and warmer tones. And then we contrasted that with the neighborhood where, you know, a lot of the characters had, you know, primary colors. Mickey is basically, you know, yellow, black, and some red, of course. And so we used the characters' colors, but the green became kind of this thread through the whole thing that held it together. And then we had a little civic center in the middle because we needed kind of a palette cleanser and something to connect it to, because we didn't want this jarring going from this cute little cartoon neighborhood to this more gritty downtown. So we added this little civic center in the center. So now getting back to this idea of a journey, we've taken people now on this visual journey, going from something they know, a little neighborhood with white picket fences and green lawns and, you know, pretty trees and flowers, you know, to a white civic center that has, you know, more monumental looking buildings like you would find. We reference things like, you know, of course, the White House and the Capitol and those things. Again, they become triggers. You know, we're not, people know all those things and have seen them. So by using elements from them, you can quickly get them in. Oh, I get it. That's the Civic Center. And then, of course, moving into the grittier Roger Rabbit side of town where we had all the brick and the stone. So now we've taken you on this visual journey.
One a couple of the things that stand out is I remember at the time, and what I love about this place is the fact that there are no right angles. The use of the curvature and just the bent to the architecture is, I think, a big part of what sends you realize initially there's something slightly different here. We have these familial kinds of things that we can tap into, but yet there's something a little different. That to me always sort of, I think, is one of the best strengths of this place. It really elevates you and transform you into that world even more.
And I think it gives it a sense of life. Again, the Roger Rabbit movie had just come out, and in the movie, all those, if you remember all the movies, all the buildings, they moved. And of course, at one point we wanted some of the buildings to move, but that was a larger engineering challenge. It was a huge engineering challenge, and of course a cost challenge. So we really thought about it. And I think if you look at the illustration or actually the photograph rather, at the top there, really trying to get that sense of flow and movement through everything. I think that's another thread in my work. And again, from animation, animation was all about getting the flow through. I think about, our life drawing classes, and, when you're learning about gesture and how important it is, from the tip of the head to the bottom of the toe, how you move through a figure, and you create movement. But the bigger thing it does is it represents life. Life is movement. A tree has movement to it. A dog running across the lawn. So even a static thing like a building, even though it's not physically moving, it's visually moving. And I think that makes it more exciting. And getting back to our bigger theme, it's more emotional.
Talk about the impact from the visitor or guest or user experience visually, and where emotion comes into play. You talked a bit about triggers and things that sort of transport you, transform those experiencing the worlds you're creating. How important, I mean, Hitchcock used to always talk about never underestimating your audience, that you always have to be keeping your audience in mind. Talk a little bit about that importance and the relation as you're designing different worlds.
I got a good example. I think this is what will help illustrate what you're asking. Matt, bring up the DCL animators palette. I think one of the great things about everything that Disney did and does, and we were taught this at school. It's, I think there's to much of the public, they think about Disney as, it's for kids. It's not for kids, and I don't think those animators and those original creators never thought about, that they were creating something for kids. They were creating deep stories, that had a wide range of emotions and explored a number of, universal themes, life and death, the good and bad. I mean, these were big themes that they were exploring. I mean, that was the brilliance of what Walt did with Snow White. I mean, that's why it defied what all the critics were saying. How's anybody going to sit through, an hour plus of cartoons? Well, they didn't realize that Walt knew the human experience and how to bring that in. And that placed, across a wide variety of ages. So one of the things we always tried to do was think about, that we're designing this for everybody. It's just, and specifically for Disney, it's the family, it's the family audience. And I think one of the most successful things that I had a part in, and I say a part in because I'm just going to take a moment to stop and say, I always stood on the shoulders of giants. We all know in animation, and probably even more so in theme park design, it took so many brilliant people. And I was fortunate to work with some of the most brilliant, and so I'm almost even a little embarrassed sometimes when I put up things, I always have to be quick to say, yes, maybe I was the creative leader, or yes, I did that initial drawing, but all the other hands that came into making it brilliant. So playing to the entire audience, I think we did this experience on the cruise ships. We had it initially on the early cruise ships. I worked on all 4 of the cruise ships as a designer on the first 2 Disney cruise ships. And then I was actually in charge overall for all the design on the 2 most recent cruise ships, the Disney Dream and the Disney Fantasy. And one of the more popular experiences that we had on the original 2 ships was this restaurant called Animator's Palette. And it really was, we had 3 levels of dining in the ship, which was something that we innovated in the cruise industry. Up until that point, everybody just went into one single dining room, and then every night they might change the theme or change the menu. We created 3 distinct dining experiences, kind of a family-oriented entertainment experience, one that was more high-end and fancy. I forget what the third one was, but this was the family dining entertainment experience. And we wanted to create something that worked for everybody. So the initial idea was that you went into this black and white, the image up on the upper left corner. It was a black and white restaurant, like you were walking into a black and white cartoon. And then through the course of the meal, what looks like just static drawings on the wall all come to life. They were just monitors, and it proved to be really, really popular. But then we had to challenge ourselves on the next generation of ships to take that to the next level. And of course, because I was an animator, and I remember that experience of seeing your drawing come to life for the first time on the screen, there's nothing quite like it. And some very brilliant people came up with a program it was an animation program, computer program, that was image agnostic. It didn't have any image. It was just pure movement. And you could take any drawing and kind of glue it to that program, and it would come to life. So I believe it was Jerry Reese. I don't know if you know who Jerry is. He's one.
We've talked with him, yeah.
Jerry is, wow, he was kind of one of my secret weapons, not so secret, because everything Jerry touched, he brought brilliance to. And I used him in a bunch of different ways, from helping me design special effects to helping to design, work on film elements in the theme park. And Jerry always went the extra mile and brought, so much more to the experience. So this experience we were creating, we wanted to give guests the experience of being an animator. So they came into this restaurant, or they do come in the restaurant, this is still playing today. And you have a placemat, and on the placemat is like a little cutout where you draw your character. And what was great is that you didn't, if you were a 3-year-old and could just draw a little stick figure, your little stick figure would be animated the same way as if I drew a more involved character and it came up on the screen. And this was incredibly empowering for people to see, their little stick drawing, even the little scribble, not only come to life up on the screen, but then we had a sequence where you can see down here with Pinocchio, where your character got to dance with the Disney characters. And then we thought, well, what is the other most, thrilling moment when you've worked on a film? That's to see your names in the credits. So we knew who everybody was. So at the end of the whole experience, we had a credit roll, or they have a credit roll, and you got to see your name there as an animator. But getting back to I think, we didn't design this, thinking, this is going to be a great experience for adults. This is going to be a great experience for little kids. This is a great experience for everybody. And I think those experiences that kind of level the playing field and let everybody get involved in some level is great. Which gets me thinking about this other idea of kind of universal design and designing for everybody in an audience. There was a kind of a physical piece to that, where if you thought about the fact that you were designing for a small child or a very old person, that meant you had to think about the usability of whatever that was, whether it was a show or a ride. And it usually came down to keeping it simple and focused. You know, in a film, you know, people are they're in an auditorium, well, at least they used to be in auditoriums. Hopefully we'll all be getting back to auditoriums soon, you know, in a darkened space, you know, with the single focus of a big screen in front of you. When you're designing these theme park attractions, rides and shows, whatever, there's always so many distractions. You know, the kid next to you is crying, you know, there's noise from a ride vehicle, whatever. So you always had to think about, you know, and this gets back to this idea of emotional triggers and visual triggers, you know, those things that are immediately going to connect people with the experience. And it always came down to keeping things simple. You know, I always said KISS, you know, you couldn't, you know, keep it simple, stupid. But that didn't mean, as we've been discussing, that you're playing down to your audience. You know, you can still create, you know, a deep experience, but if you're a good designer, you know how to orchestrate that experience so it plays to everybody. You know, they get what's there, but there's still, you know, levels of nuances and things in there that give it deeper meaning.
I think, you know, I run into this quite a bit too. People think if it is geared towards children, it has to be, and I hate this reference, dumbed down. In fact, I challenge that each time to state we have to be even smarter, particularly dealing with young minds, because they can take us places far more imaginative than we as jaded adults can go. So and you bring up an interesting point about those challenges, and I'm always endlessly fascinated with what Imagineers are doing in taking storylines, which as a writer would be perceived as two-dimensional, relying on imagination, and then pushing it into an environment which gives it dimension, but then pushing that dimension even further into experience. And I think a key part of what leads that is emotion. Talk a bit about the importance of experience in what you do, and the relationship of experience to emotion.
Well, you can go in a number of different directions with that. Well, of course, you know, there's different kinds of experiences that we're providing in the theme park. You know, there are ride experiences. Some are passive. You know, like best example of that is Small World in a slow moving boat, where there's a lot of visual stimuli around you. Some are dynamic, like Space Mountain, where you're in a roller coaster. You know, some are simple, you know, little go around rides. But again, because there's this story component to them, and understanding how much of that story you want to, the story is always going to be there. As I said earlier, and for me, story was also a big emotional connector. And we use story to, like I said earlier, you know, in a narrative way, where mostly when it's based on an existing movie or book or such, you know, on an IP. And that does a lot of the heavy lifting for you in terms of, you know, creating that experience, that emotional connection to the experience. But then other times, you know, you had to have some kind of subtext. We often would create stories too, that worked more as a subtext for the designer, because what it would do then is, it's kind of like a score, a musical score, right? The composer makes this musical score, and everybody agrees to this. This is how we're going to play this score. And I use this analogy a few times, because the musical score doesn't necessarily limit the creativity of the performers. It's a roadmap of where you're going to go, and it's agreed upon roadmap. Everybody knows we're going to play this many bars, and then we're going to rest, and we're going to. But that doesn't mean that the performer can't put their own emotional, heart and soul into what they're doing.
Yeah, yeah. No, there is that added layer of going to hear, a high school performance of Bach's, cello concertos, and then getting to hear Yo-Yo Ma.
Yeah.
That. There's a difference there. It's essentially the same roadmap, but you're getting there in a very different way, and there are pluses and minuses to each. But so apply that to when we are. Well, you talked about story. I had a thought here. Do you also have to? I mean, we're assuming that your audience or your people experiencing your attraction are familiar with the story, but yet, is that too much of an assumption? Are there, there are still those trigger points are playing a role to tap people into those emotions, but they're also there to help those who may not have seen or experienced this story.
That's right. That's right.
So, I mean, they're playing a dual role there,
right.
But yet the experience is going to still seem different each time.
A couple things. You're right. You can't depend on the audience knowing the story. And even if it's a story that they know, I always said that IP fades, Yeah. We did, there are some movies and stories that are almost perennial. They'll be around forever, either because the studios continue to make sequels, or that they were so touching that, they're almost like they become like a family heirloom. Every family, we're going to sit down. Like, I remember as a kid watching The Wizard of Oz with my mother, because that movie was so impactful to her, and and every year we had to watch The Wizard of Oz, when it came on TV.
But it's such a subjective experience for each person. As you said, when you look at Wizard of Oz, you tap into that experience with your mother. Whereas I look at it and I remember hiding behind my fingers because of the Wicked Witch.
Exactly.
So how do you almost yet unify an experience for your guests, but also let them bring to it their own unique, but then free them up? You don't want to homogenize the experience. Yeah. That strikes me as a delicate balance, because we're each walking in with our own emotional baggage, if you will, on that experience when we're about to step into Small World. But how do you wrangle that, or enhance that, or maximize that?
I think that was the genius of what Walt did with the original park, and John Hench was always quick to talk about this and could articulate it so beautifully about it was a controlled visual experience. That he always talked about how every building knew the other buildings. In other words, like he talked about how in cities there's chaos, and chaos creates anxiety, because you're visually, or they're often overwhelming with one store trying to compete with the other in terms of a bigger marquee or whatever. And so the result of that was this kind of visual chaos that put you on edge. What Walt did, and what John talked about, was this idea of creating visual reassurance, because every building knew the other building, and it came out of a single design aesthetic, getting back to this kind of subtext story idea that I talked about, or that piece of music where everybody agrees it's going to start here and go here. We're going to modulate the visual experience to move you down a main street with a castle in front of you. And when you get to that castle, we're going to give you some choices of where to go. And then there's going to be some dynamic visual element, a steamboat at the end of a frontier street, or a merry-go-round inside of the castle, that are going to draw you to this next thing. So it was very, very thoughtfully or visually orchestrated, but the end result was bigger than creating something that had, very clear visual organization to it. You still got to make choices. They weren't leading you with a leash, but each choice was done in a way that you never felt that you would get lost.
Yeah.
There was always that big castle. I know if I go back to that big castle, I'm in the center of this whole thing. So the end result was this sense of, they called it the architecture of reassurance, that you felt reassured in these space. And it was part of the big success early on that people couldn't articulate. They went into the Disney park, it's like, well, I feel different here.
Yeah.
And part of that was because the designers were brilliant in creating a series of visual statements that moved you through this, but never put you in a sense of chaos, and never put you where you felt anxiety.
Well, and a combination of, as you bring this about, that wonderful opening plaque of you're about to enter into a new world, just very subtle, charming, delightful ways of getting you into this world and shifting that, suspending your disbelief as we do in the movie theater and in a darkened room. But there's also certainly this world of reassurance, but yet also surprise. And so that strikes me. I love the little bit of not a clash, but the blend of that, because emotionally, that's another key point that we want to bring about in these experiences. That lovely surprise, the unexpected, but in an reassuring way. Is that the trick? Is that the magic, the secret sauce that we strive for as Imagineers and environmental storytellers? What is that?
I'm not sure if I know what you're asking exactly here.
You talked about this world, establishing a world of architectural reassurance or environment of reassurance. But yet the magic that I see when I go to experience the parks is also this element of surprise.
Yeah.
Yes, you have guided sense of where you need to go, but there's still some little twist or element of surprise, the unexpected.
I think that again is the brilliance of how these experiences are laid out. And some, as the parks evolved and more parks were developed, I think they have varying degrees of this controlled. I'm going to move you from point A to point B. And some on purpose were designed with more this idea of exploration and surprise. I'll use the example of the animal kingdom down in Florida. And the brilliant Joe Rohde, again, tip of the hat to Joe Rohde, probably one of my favorite designers, Imagineers. And Joe was a world explorer. And Joe knew the experience of going to an exotic place and turning the corner and being surprised by a temple that, you didn't expect to be there, and so he brilliantly designed the animal kingdom in Florida, kind of broke the paradigm of the main street with the castle, although he did have, the big tree in the center, which does the same thing as the castle in terms of orienting and creating some kind of main visual focus, but certainly to creating that element of surprise that you're talking about. And I think that's anybody that's traveled, that you can get the map, and you might got to get a guide or whatever, but it's always those moments of finding that little street and finding that tea shop that wasn't in any tour book, and meeting the proprietor of that shop and having a conversation with them. And that's the surprise. And I think that's the brilliance of what Joe did with Animal Kingdom, that he really was able to do that, but still using all those bigger tools that we were discussing earlier. And I think there are varying degrees of that in the other parks, and a lot of it has to do too with the human interaction. These parks aren't just, we often talk, they're not just a big stage. they're a stage populated with performers or the cast. They call, in fact, Walt coined the phrase cast members because he knew they were playing a role in this bigger experience that you're having. So I think they add another layer of surprise to the experience as well.
Well, I think that is a key part, that consciousness of the roles being played and how that integrates into the environment and adds to the experience is one of the great pluses of the really unique, like I said, the special sauce that unfolds at Disney unlike any other place. And some people fault it sometimes, but really when you don't have it, after having experienced it in the world of Disney, it stands out and you begin to appreciate it. I want to open up. I see we've got a couple of questions coming in. Matt, I want to make sure we get to those.
Yeah, before we get into questions, we have the statement in the chat from Marcello Vignali.
Mo! Oh my gosh, Mo's hand is all over Toontown. The Roger Rabbit ride, some of those brilliant illustrations. And Mo and I are in the Roger Rabbit ride.
Really?
Mo did these great caricatures of he and I as clowns. And there's a moment where you go into the warehouse, and there's Mo and myself. Yeah.
I love it. We will have to venture out there as soon as we can and find those clowns.
Well, he says, it's great to see you, Joe. And he goes on to say, speak to the importance of establishing shot in a themed entertainment.
Of course. Just like in a movie, in a good movie, they always tell you where you are, and you have that establishing shot. And in a lot of the things that I got to work on, I think a great example, or a park that was designed with great establishing shots. In other words, creating a visual or a pathway that brought you to some point that had an overlook that allowed you to take in a larger breadth of that place in the park and tell you where you're going and entice you. And getting back to what we were talking about, making you want to go into it. Tokyo Disneysea, and I did not do the layout of that park. Again, a tip of the hat to all the brilliant people, the Kirk brothers and Joe Kilinowski and all these people that worked on the layout of that park. But they designed it with this idea that most of the lands that you walked into had some kind of either elevated or a pathway that took you to some point where you got that kind of establishing shot. I'm going into this Arabian world, or I'm going into this, volcano world. We were fortunate with Toontown by virtue of where it ended up in the park. You had to go under the train track. And then when you came up on the other side, it was kind of exposed in front of you. So just like in a movie, the establishing shot helps tell you, where I'm going, kind of the tone of that place. And in the theme park, it actually works to orient you, physically orient you. Oh, I have to walk down that path to go to that place. Thank you, Marcelo.
Information, but also certainly information and orientation, but emotion in a way. Again, getting back to this.
Yeah, well, and excitement. Getting back to what we were talking about, like travel. Like we said, when you're traveling somewhere, you're excited to be in this new place. You're seeing things for the first time. When you're traveling, again, it has that element, a little bit of the element of the unknown. And I think that's the trick with the design of the theme parks. We want to control the experience and create a little bit of that sense of the unknown, like you were talking about earlier about the sense of surprise, which I think is very important. But because it's a theme park and because it's kind of one of the tenets of what makes it work, it's a safer, controlled moving through the experience, but you still want that excitement of, oh my God, what's behind that wall. I think another great example, non-Disney example, is the Diagon Alley in the Universal Park in Florida. where, they just created, you come out of the train station, they create this wall, and there's no signage on it. And you go, the first time I went through, I go, am I in the right place? And you turn that corner and you're immersed in that Harry Potter world.
Yeah.
Brilliant piece of design.
And I forgive me for not calling up directly who the architect was, but I know Tony Duquette, as a designer, talked about going into smaller spaces and then opening up into a larger experience. Just that from tight to vast, as opposites, working in opposites, and what that can elicit in terms of emotion.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember the name of the architect too. In fact, there's a whole book written about it. But yeah, because it's like the effect being in a cathedral. They were designed to create a sense of awe. You're in the presence of God. So we're going to create these giant doors, even though the actual opening only needs to be this big, and these giant spaces. And it's important in our design. I mean, we thought about those things. A great dark ride. These rides where you go through these various scenes. Really uses that a lot. We take you through a small space that then opens to a big space. We take you to a cool space that opens to a warm space. And this is also helps to contribute to that idea of going on a journey. I've moved through all these different spaces, and it makes a 4-minute experience feel much longer because you've taken them and orchestrated how you've moved them through those spaces.
I think that idea of you have a lot of tools to work with, far more than I think you might give thought to, and this idea of contrast in terms of space or line or color can be applied. I find it endlessly fascinating as someone who's worked on the written page and the screen in 2D to a degree, how that can then still lift. Again, getting back to your all art is one, applying all of that into literally a space you can move into. And I find that seeing a lot of museum experiences move into that as well, where it isn't purely just art on a wall, but you're stepping into an environment to experience that art.
Well, so there's a whole book, and it's actually a number of years old now, but I think it's even more relevant now. It's called The Experience Economy. And I can't remember the name of the authors, but you can Google it.
We'll get that posted for everybody.
Yeah, The Experience Economy, because they talk about the fact that, and they actually reference Disney as kind of the source of this, of creating experiences. And they talk about how it actually is better for commerce, because a lot of the things we've talked about today, because it's connecting you at a deeper emotional level to the experience, whether it's in a museum, whether it's shopping experiences. I think there's a lot of talk right now in my industry about, what's happening in retail, with all these malls closing down, and people buying more and more things online. The actual act of buying, it's a whole paradigm shift. People, I think the first way they think about, I'm going to buy something, is to get on their computer and look it up. So now, how do you create, what's this next thing? And whoever figures this out, it's going to be very rich. This next retail experience that's going to be just that, an experience. It's going to be something deeper, more immersive, probably with storytelling, using a lot of the things that we've been talking about today.
Well, and that's what keeps us on the cutting edge, keeps you on the cutting edge after such an extensive career already, is this ever forward march and approach to what you do, and taking these great toolkit of experience and applied knowledge and moving it forward. I just find that endlessly fascinating. We've got more questions coming in, Matt. Let's jump to those.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to go to the first question here from Patty, who says that they're about to start college and have always wanted to be an Imagineer. What do you recommend studying in school for students who would like a career in Imagineering?
Well, Imagineers come from, I got to tell you, I loved animation, and all I learned there. But there's kind of don't take this the wrong way. There's kind of a ghetto of thought, because animation is a process. It may be a 2D film or a 3D film, but it has to follow a process to get from the script idea to up on the screen. And so it takes, you have to have animators, you have to have layout people, you have all the kind of, there's disciplines that are involved that pretty much for every animated film, follow this same process. What I loved about animation was, what I loved about theme park design was that it took so many different disciplines to create what we did there and what we do there. Takes architects, engineers, model builders, concept designers, but also each of the projects each one's very different from the other. When I think about, doing Toontown and then doing miniature golf courses and then doing cruise ships, your end goal was always to create this deeper emotional experience for the guests and make sure that it represented the Disney brand or whatever brand, you were designing for. But each one took a very different thought process and very different skill set. And people like the cruise ships were really interesting to me because now all of a sudden I'm working with naval architects and I'm working with naval engineers and understanding, the restrictions that Coast Guard puts on the amount of materials that you could use that are flammable, et cetera, et cetera. So to answer the question for this young student, I would say, whatever your interest is, if it's story or if it's art or if it's color or it's design, study it, become great at your craft and keep an open mind about, working with other designers, study. What I loved about what we were talking about Walt's 9 Old Men and those artists that created those early films and Walt's artists that created the theme parks, they were innovating. They weren't imitating. They were creating something wholly new. I would say to students, study what's done in the parks today, but be a student of life. Go out, go to museums, go to concerts, read books. I think the greatest Imagineers are those with the broadest spectrum of interests and the broadest spectrum and understanding of the world. There's no straight path to becoming an Imagineer.
You touched on something in your answer there that I think is important to clarify. And I find my own frustrations with this too. I see a lot out there commercially, and I also see within students that they're struggling with this idea and we don't look at it enough, but the importance of innovation, doing something fresh that has never been done before. Oftentimes people think by achieving something, they're actually replicating. Oh, I see that person who's done something, I'm going to do that too. Rather than, well, why don't I go off in this direction? And I think we're losing those skills. Talk a little bit about what it takes to innovate, and the importance of, you've talked about the importance of innovation, but the student of life stuff is great. Now, how do we apply that? How do we put that into what it is we want to be doing that will make it innovative?
There's a great book by, in fact, actually, I have it right here because I'm just speech. It's called "The Whack on the Side of the Head" by Roger Van Oak. It's been around for a while, and it's about innovation. And one of the things he talks about in the book is looking outside of your whatever that is that you're pursuing. He used the example, like if I got the assignment to design a new coat of armor, don't go back and look at all the coats of armor, all the suits of armor that had been designed before, because you'll just be coming up with the next generation of that. If you want to create if you want to create the new one, he goes, go study exoskeletons on bugs. Right? To understand, how how the dynamic, but that's the way that they think. And and that was another great thing about Imagineering is, like I said, because you were working with an engineer who, maybe had a much more academic kind of, I don't want to call it a narrow way of thinking about things, but he would look, they have to look because, their job is to make sure that building doesn't fall down. But that doesn't mean that by having a conversation with them about what you were doing, they would bring a different insight or a different thought or bring you somewhere where you wouldn't have gone otherwise. So I think this idea of innovating is, again, you have to learn your craft and you have to be really great at your craft and be smart about it. But then when it comes time to like, what is this next thing I'm going to do? Again, go out in the world and look somewhere else.
I always refer to my students to think peripherally.
Yes, that's
Think
great.
a little wider in what they're doing and applying that to what it is they're doing. Stepping outside of the straight ahead course, reapproaching it a little differently. And I think that it also, you bring up some great points about being a well-rounded person as an artist. I think there's a responsibility there, certainly learning your craft, but looking at the work of others, the wider world beyond your immediate world, and that only enhances what you do.
Yeah.
I think too often when, particularly in a school situation, we're so focused on getting through those hoops, and then when we get out in the wide world, it's a very different thing. So those are other great suggestions. We've got more questions coming in, Matt. Let's jump to those.
Yeah, our next question is coming from Johnny, who wanted to ask about engineering or Imagineering. Is it a teamwork-based working place?
Oh yeah. It takes a team for sure. And like I mentioned earlier, I put up drawings of things that I did or photos of projects I worked on. Again, I was only as good as the teams that we assembled together. And I think it's just like, putting together a great, crew for a movie or for a TV show. There is chemistry that happens when you get the right people together. Marcelo Vignali, who sent that question earlier, he was part of what I thought was maybe one of the best teams that I ever got to work with, was on Toontown and the Roger Rabbit ride. And we were all pretty new at what we were doing. But there was also a chemistry that happened, between us, and a great give and take between us. So the chemistry piece, I think, is very important. And sometimes you're lucky, that, you just have the right minds that all come together. And other times it's a struggle. And sometimes the struggle can be good because it challenges you. Having individuals on a team that might have a very different point of view about things. If you're open-minded, you listen to them, and maybe their point of view might change the way you would have done something. I always say, often, I always said, when somebody would be criticizing something or had a different point of view, I'd always have to ask myself, is it different or is it better? Because often, you can change something and it'll just, okay, but you went from something that was this big and yellow to something that was this big and blue. But is it better? Yeah. And if I came at it that way, and I could have an intelligent conversation with someone about it, then it didn't become like a debate or, an argument. It was like, okay, and especially getting back to that musical score. If we all knew what the musical score was and where we wanted to end up, and we're in agreement to that, then we could have a discussion around whether it was, different or better.
That's a whole other great subject.
Yes.
Oh, I ask that so many times each day. Keep going, Matt. We've got some good questions coming in.
Our next question comes from Nick, who's asking, is it easier to create an attraction from an existing story, such as one from a movie, or to create a whole backstory for an attraction for something like Expedition Everest?
Well, you know what? Each of them has their challenges. I think I touched upon this a little bit. I think when you're using an existing IP, like doing a Star Tours ride or a Harry Potter ride, or I did an Iron Man ride, and I did a Monsters Inc. ride, and and your challenge there is to understand that you've got 3 minutes to 10 minutes to kind of synthesize down those things that people remember from the movie. And I call them triggers. The music would trigger an emotional connection back to the experience. Certain scenes, like I worked on the Winnie the Pooh ride, the first one that we did in Tokyo. And I remember we had sessions about, what were those things that people will absolutely want to see from the Winnie the Pooh movies? Well, of course, you're going to want to bounce with Tigger. You want to see the Heffalumps and Woozles. It was almost like you have to check the boxes of these are the things you're going to want to see. And then, staging them so that they're at least close to what they saw in the movie, and putting the music behind it that they all recognize. So that's kind of the challenge with working with known IP. When you're creating something wholly original, and unfortunately, because these companies spend a lot of money to get these IPs, I think there's less and less original things being done. But I think it's the same thing. I did an attraction in Hong Kong called Mystic Manor, and it had a very, very linear story to it. They originally wanted us to do a haunted mansion there, but in China and Hong Kong, we found that the culture had a very different kind of understanding of the afterlife, and singing happy ghosts wouldn't necessarily resonate with them the way it does with American audiences. So we had this idea about this explorer who went out, and because basically we wanted to create with the haunted mansion is basically an illusion show. It's grand illusions, which they were brilliant at using old magic to create this great experience. So we wanted to do like the 21st century version of that, but we also wanted to tell the story. So we thought about it just like a movie. The main character was this world explorer, Lord Henry Mystic. We wanted to give him a sidekick, so that gave him empathy and made connection to the guests. And we chose this little monkey that he finds in the jungle, because that also had a connection to the Asian audience. The monkey is used in their literature, The Journey to the West, very famous story, about the Monkey King and going through these life lessons and learning through their mistakes. So it was something that we knew that they would understand. But we approached it just the same way you would a movie. We created the characters, we created the places, but then our job was to make sure that was communicated up front. Because the thing with the movie is you've seen the movie before. So we had tools that we used to introduce you to the monkey, introduce you to Lord Henry Mystic, introduce you to their adventures together. And we used a whole variety of devices to do that, from the walking through the pre-show and having pictures and things of how they met in the jungle, to actually then bringing people into a room, closing the door, and having a little theatrical experience with an animatronic monkey and film on the wall that gave you the whole backstory. So then by the time people actually got into the ride vehicle, we had done basically what the movies would do, and that is tell you who the characters are, what their motivations are, why you were there. And then at that point, hopefully you have enough understanding of it all that you can enjoy the experience.
Amazing. And I love hearing of the detail that goes into the care and detail that goes into so much of what is behind the scenes, and that we just sort of we get to step into. Has anybody tracked the man hours of what leads up to getting that first instant impression and impact?
I always said if the company, either Disney or Universal, whatever, had to really pay for all the hours that the Imagineers and the artists put into these attractions, they couldn't afford it. In fact, when I became an executive, I found myself often defending the teams and letting these executives who were just looking at numbers on a sheet understand that you were dealing with passionate artists.
Yeah.
And when an artist is passionate, they wake up in the middle of the night and will get out of bed and grab a sketchbook, grab a brush, and start working.
Yeah.
And that's how it was with most of the teams I worked with. These people were so passionate about what they did, that they put hours and hours of energy into it. You can't turn it off.
No.
That's a different. You're not making widgets. You're not making a plastic glass. You're creating some kind of artistic statement that you're putting yourself into, your emotions, your skills into, and you can't track the hours. And I often said they couldn't afford to do these projects because these people spent so many hours. I remember when we were back on Toontown, we had this one artist who was sculpting all those crazy looking houses, because basically those houses are sculptures. They have to all be, they put cement on them and then somebody has to sculpt them to look like wood or to look like metal or whatever. And this guy, Joel Horme, I remember he would get up like at 3 a.m, go and get his own lights because the contractor wasn't there, set up his lights so he could go and work on things because he was passionate about getting it right. And we had the project manager saying, well, we only have 15 hours left here, before you have to move to the next thing. But it wasn't good enough. So he would get up and make sure it was as great as it could be because he was passionate.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a whole other subject we could get into is for those who may not feel like they are inclined to the creatives, how to work with creatives and
oh yes.
That's another round.
Yes, indeed.
Another round.
Right.
File that one for a future
Okay.
take.
Yeah.
Let's jump back to the questions, Matt. I want to make sure we get these in.
Yeah, this next one's from Alexandra, who's asking, who decides which rides get made and which IP gets chosen for the rides? What kind of creative input do you get to have?
Oh, well, who chooses? Well, I think often it's the park operators, the people that operate the parks. They listen to people a lot, and a lot of it has to do with also the kind of menu of rides in any given park too. When I was working on Hong Kong, it was one of the smaller Disney parks when it was initially built. So we knew we had to expand the offerings there. And one of the great things about Disney parks, and we talked about this earlier, you have your dark rides, which are passive, and you have your coasters, and you've got your more passive little go-around rides and such. So often, in terms of just the kinds of attractions, the operators will look at it and go, like we did with Hong Kong, we only have 2 dark rides here. So that's why they said we wanted to have some bigger, grand dark ride statements. So we're going to do this Mystic Manor ride. And then in terms of the IP, as I said earlier, these companies now, Disney owns so many IPs now between Lucasfilm and Marvel and Pixar. And often it has to do with the popularity and the appropriateness of a certain IP and how it'll translate into a park, and then being smart about how you marry that IP with the right attraction. Is it going to be a show? Is it going to be a parade? Whatever. So it's a little complicated. Some of it's subjective, but I think a lot of it has to do with always with economics and with listening to your guest, your audience, and understanding, what they want to see. Entertainment in the parks was always the way to get something out quickly when a new IP came out or a new movie came out, because these rides take anywhere from 3 to 5 years to design and build and prototype and test and whatever. So like putting on a parade based on a new Toy Story film was a lot quicker than building a whole Toy Story land. So I think that answered your question. I hope so.
I think the timeliness of certain IP, as you mentioned, is key, but also timelessness
Yes.
of the experience. Talk a little bit about that. I mean, that does strike me as a bit of a struggle. We're at such a ferocious pace with what we
Yeah.
as consumers, but yet some of our IP has come through as timeless. So it strikes me there's another avenue where emotion plays in. You know,
Mhm.
seeing that familiar character with the ears um, sparks things for each of us in different ways emotionally. What kind of attention do you have to pay to that? Certainly, you want to get things out so that uh, guests can experience things in a timely way, but there has to be, I would imagine, a respect, a tip of the hat, a nod to how do we keep this timeless? I mean, are we being mindful of color palettes and costume design or architectural design so it
Mhm.
either brings in a certain time period or keeps it more of a unified time period? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think all those things come into play, again, what we've been talking about finding emotional triggers, things, how certain colors make you feel, how certain music makes you feel, and understanding how to use those. But I often would talk to the teams about stripping away. Let's get to what is the core of this experience. As I mentioned earlier, IP will fade. Some of it, I think, like, Toy Story, those characters there's so many films, and like the Wizard of Oz, I think there's going to be generations that are always going to hand those down. But especially in these rides where you're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to put concrete in the ground and put steel up and come up with these complicated ride systems and such. Once people no longer know who those characters are, there still has to be things in there or things about the experience that are always going to resonate. And that's why you see a lot of attractions where they add some kind of interactivity. Good example is the Buzz Lightyear rides there. And I think every park has this, it's almost like a ride through shooting gallery. And it's got Buzz Lightyear, and it's got the Zurg character, whatever. And even if you don't know who those characters are, it's still a fun experience of going through and trying to find the batteries with your little blaster and collect the points. So yeah, and Universal is good about creating some kind of thrill element, like the Harry Potter Forbidden Journey ride or the Gringotts ride, where the ride itself has some visceral element to it that's exciting. So even if I don't know those characters or I'm not 100% familiar with them, the experience the bigger experience that I'm creating that's moving you through it is always going to be fun.
How
Like,
important or frequent do you need to refresh or update or tune up certain rides in terms of their, like gags or jokes that may suddenly, over time, as we
yeah,
raise our collective consciousness, may not be appropriate, that kind of thing?
yeah, we're seeing a lot of that right now, like, Disney going back and, changing some of the scenes in Pirates of the Caribbean that, are not maybe, were of, were thought of in a different time by different people, and how they're being viewed today. And I got some strong opinions about that. Either way, it's probably a discussion for another day. Or like Splash Mountain, changing that story because it's, there's some racial things there that people are uncomfortable with, which, and I think that's all good. And I think it's great, that you're constantly, the parks are still very aware that, these things. I mean, that's what Walt said about the original Disneyland, why he loved it. Cause he said, once I finish these films and then they're in the can, that's it, they're done. Unless you're making the Justice League film and somebody's going to throw another few million at you to redo it or expand it. But no, for the most part, no, the film is done. But Walt said, the trees will grow, the flowers will grow, and and they change the parades out. Thing with the rides,
Ever evolving, yeah.
yeah. especially, and that's why I think they're using more media in the rides,
Mhm.
because, you know, you can change out a media component and maybe make it a little different. It's hard though in a lot of the rides, because as I said earlier, you spend a lot of money and they're permanent things. It's buildings with ride systems in them. But you know, you can see throughout the park. I guess they recently did some upgrades in the Haunted Mansion as well. A lot of it has to do with technology too. You know, a lot of work being done with texture mapping and projection that creates much more dynamic environments. And then those are things that you can go back into. And so I think it's a combination of, you know, technology upgrades, story upgrades. But that's what's great about these parks, that you can do that.
Well, and in the initial design, is that something that's shifted over time where you're realizing, you know, how flexible do we need to from the beginning, how flexible do we need to design this so that there are areas where we can slightly shift the experience and bring guests back for something more, because it's that fine balance between what is familiar, as you said, this
Right,
reassurance of we know we're assured we're gonna have a
right.
great time on this, but oh, they changed it somehow. There's controversy there, but yet there's also growth and
Mhm.
excitement and surprise, and um, seems to me a real fine line you've got to
Yeah,
walk, right?
yeah. And I think, and some of the attractions are even being designed from day one with this idea of repeatability. You know,
Mm,
especially, you know, there are people where these parks are become like a religious experience. They're making,
yes.
you know, they're there often, and some rides are highly repeatable. I think rides with a high, you know, dynamic, visceral experience like roller coasters, you can go on them time and time again because it's the fun of, you know, just being on that dynamic coaster. But other, you know, more storytelling attractions, that's why you're seeing less of like the old fashioned animatronic shows like the singing bear shows, because once you saw it and you knew, okay, they're going to sing this song, whatever, it's fun for the first timers, but the people that came back multiple times wouldn't go to those shows. So a lot of the rides, like what they did with the new um, smugglers ride in the new Star Wars land, Galaxy's Edge, you know, it has different show experiences within a single ride. They initially did that with the Star Tours ride, where they called it the jukebox of places you could go to. They had, you know, all those famous places from the films, and you didn't know if you were going to go to Hoth or Tatooine or wherever, but it so made every time you went on the experience, it made it a little different. So yeah, that is a big challenge. I think, as you said, both making sure it's fresh and it's repeatable, but also that it's current and it's relevant in terms of what it's saying about who we are right now.
Yeah, those are, and again, part of the mastery of what you do. Matt, more questions coming in.
Yeah, we have just a couple more questions. The first one here coming from Chris, who's asking, how do you see the future use of digital images in theme parks like the new Mickey's Runaway Railway?
Oh, I think it's fantastic. In fact, I actually worked on that a little bit up front, and what it does, you know, just what Mindy and I were talking about. I think when things are more media based, it'll be much easier to go into something that's media based, like that attraction, which is mostly mapped projection imagery, um, and and be able to go in and tweak it. And I think the other advantage, there's a dynamics to it, a visual dynamics to it. You know, people are not wowed so easily because we have these things in our pockets that have all the music and all the visual things on it
We're very
that
sophisticated these days.
yes, yes. So um you know, creating it gets back to this whole thing, a heightened emotional experience. If I can put somebody inside of what looks like a CG movie, you know, and has the visual dynamics of that, that's great. So I think that's the power of, all this projection mapping and such that we're doing now. Universal just opened a ride based on the Pets movies. And although I haven't written it yet, I've watched it online and talked to some of the people actually working on it. And it's a really nice combination of using projected effects and dimensional effects. Something I tried to do in that Mystic Manor ride. We used a lot of, again, with the help of the brilliant Jerry Reese, helped us really combine dimensional sets with projection. And I think the ones for me that are the more successful was where you really blur the line. With the Runaway train ride, the idea is that you're actually going into a cartoon. So making it all look like a cartoon world, was fine and satisfied what their objective was in terms of bringing you into that kind of world. But when you can combine the projection with animatronics and with live sets in a way that becomes seamless, and it just becomes bigger than any one effect and more about the story and more about drawing you into the experience, I think then those kinds of things are very, very successful in my mind.
I think, as you begin a project, you're venturing into the unknown more often than not with each project. That's what's exciting about it. It's not stamping out the same thing.
Right.
And I love the fact that you have these core tenets that ground you and guide you through the process of that. Have any of the subjects or experiences that you've created presented any unique challenge that still mystifies you or caused you to kind of think even further than you might have thought about it? Pushed your boundaries a little bit?
I think every single assignment pushes you if you're going to do it well. And as I mentioned earlier, because they're all so different, both from how you have to approach them conceptually and how you have to approach them from a technical standpoint, and how you have to think about how you're going to apply the story and the emotion and the art, because you want to have all those things in there. And as we've been talking about, that's what resonates with the guest and really connects with them. And so each one that's the challenge. How do I create an emotionally resonant experience in a restaurant in a cruise ship? Is very different from, how do I create an emotionally resonant experience in a dark ride in a Magic Kingdom park. So that was always the challenge, and there's because you're working in the physical world, there's always huge physical limitations. Film, sky's the limit. You can do anything, especially with CG now. And you can go anywhere, do anything. And I think that's one of the advantages too now of using projected imagery, like we've mentioned, because it broadens that world, but you're still in a building that has to have, air conditioning in it. It has to have, fire safety and all these things that in some way, limit where you can really go with it. So again, tip of hat to all the great Imagineers, all the amazing experiences that they've created in the face of all those physical challenges.
What's the one experience, because your artistry really is within this world of experience, what's the one kind of blue sky experience that you've yet to create?
Wow. If I knew that.
You're doing it, right? And we'd all get to benefit from that.
I'm excited right now. I'm excited. We're coming out of this pandemic, and people are really hungry for experiences. I think the thing that we've all missed the most is this collective experience of being together. And I think that's the thing. It's unfortunate that some movie theater chains are closing down. I was heartbroken to hear that the arc lights are closing. And but I think the thirst for a collective human experience will never go away. I mean, that's why the Greeks traveled for, hundreds of miles to go to the amphitheater to watch drama. I think that's part of it's who we are. It's our DNA. We want to be, and I think that deepens the experience too. That collective, we're all together and we're all laughing at this thing, or we're all together and we're all crying and we're all clapping. So for me, I think, finding as we're shifting, and I think movies will come back, concerts are definitely going to come back, but this idea, what are the next great collective experiences? What are those things? And there's some interesting stuff being done out there right now. There's a company called Dreamscape that's doing virtual reality walkthroughs. If you haven't done it, you should try it because it's mind-blowing. They completely immerse you in a VR world and you get to interact with it in some amazing ways. So that excites me. What are those new collective experiences that we're going to be able to go out as human beings together and be touched deeply emotionally, be awed, and be inspired?
Can't wait. And I know you're going to be leading the pack on that.
Oh,
So
God love you.
forward to it. Joe, I want to thank you for an incredible and sadly limited time. We could go on for days, and I think we've got several topics that we can easily explore. So stay tuned on that. But thank you again for sharing your brilliance, your experience, and your insights with us today in these great continued essential conversations here at Primary Sources. So
thank you. You're amazing, Mindy. Thank you so much for being such a great hostess today. And I've been tipping my hat a lot, tip of the hat to Tina Price and what she's created with Creative Talent Network. And she is inspirational. What she's done with Creative Talent Network is amazing. So I would be remiss not to make that acknowledgement.
Community, and the community experience. So to your point, and yes, indeed, we are grateful for Tina and the amazing team here. Matt.
Yes, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, everybody that was behind making this work today.
Yeah, thank you for everybody who joined in. Please watch in the chat line. We'll have more information. These recordings are available. Give us a few days to get this up onto the links, and but you can tune back in and absorb more of the brilliance of Joe. And please stay tuned. We will have more ahead. So keep an eye on that website. So again, my thanks to you, Joe, Joe Lanzisero, and our great teams here at CTN for making this happen. We'll see you next time on Primary Sources. Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye.
Take care. Be safe.
Bye-bye. Yes.